So as always, hello and welcome to another installment of Conservation Conversations. I'm your host, Melissa Howes-Whitecross, and tonight, for the first time, I'm also your presenter. I'm very excited to be co-presenting this evening's webinar with Dr. Lucy Kemp, the director of the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project. For those of you listening through Facebook Live, welcome to you as well. Please remember that you can write your questions and comments into the comment feed on Facebook, and we will do our best to get to those comments and questions as well at the end of the presentation. Now, before I ask Lucy to tell you a little bit more about herself, let me tell you a little bit more about me. From an early age, I've always loved birds and the outdoors, and this has led me to study ecology at Wits University in Johannesburg, where I ultimately finished my PhD in 2017. I actually studied trees for my PhD. I didn't study birds, but I maintained a strong passion for birds throughout my postgrad. And I saw the opportunity to merge my love of birds and my knowledge in ecology when I got an opportunity to do an internship at BirdLife South Africa starting in 2017 as well. During that internship, I was able to get involved with some of the species research going on. And one of the projects that I was lucky enough to be called in on was the Southern Ground-Hornbill Action Group. And this was where I first met Lucy Kemp. After taking up this internship position, I was offered a full-time position as the Raptor and Large Terrestrial Bird Project Manager in 2018. And I held that position up until the beginning of this year, when I was promoted to Landscape Conservation Program Manager. So now, instead of just focusing on our raptors and large terrestrial birds, I have the responsibility of coordinating an awesome team of conservation scientists who are doing their utmost to protect our terrestrial birds and their natural habitats. And I'm extremely proud of this group of very talented conservation scientists. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some of their work with you as this webinar series continues. Those of you who tuned in last week would have heard Sam Ralston-Payton sharing her renewable energy work. And it really is cutting edge, fascinating stuff. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Lucy just to tell you all a little bit more about herself, and then we'll move on to the presentation. Thank you, Lucy.
Cool, thanks, Mel. Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone's staying safe and sane in these crazy times. And yeah, thrilled for this opportunity from BirdLife to be able to present some of our work and have this platform for sharing. I, unlike Melissa, did not always love birds. I was raised as a child of an ornithologist, which meant that my entire childhood was spent being dragged around the country looking at birds when I wanted to look at lions and other things. So I've come to birds late in life, but I studied marine biology at UCT, and I've worked on a number of species in Namibia on black rhino and high-value plant species. So I guess my heart is in conservation of anything. But I've managed to land up with these amazing, amazing birds as my responsibility. And so I've been the project manager for the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project for almost 10 years now. And I can't believe it's gone that fast. And I'm also the co-chair of the IUCN Hornbill Specialist Group. So taking a lot of the lessons being learned from hornbill projects around the world and figuring out how we can share them with new hornbill projects that are starting, and just see how we can escalate hornbill conservation worldwide.
Okay, everyone, let's dive in. So it is my privilege to present to you the Bird of the Year 2020 talk with one of my absolute conservation idols, Dr. Lucy Kemp. And we really need to thank the Hans Hohausen Charitable Trust, who have been a big supporter of the Bird of the Year campaign. They provide a lot of the support for some of the education materials that you will be seeing a little bit later. And we really are grateful to them for their support. And of course, our partners on this year's Bird of the Year campaign, the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project, who are also our BirdLife species guardian for the Southern Ground-Hornbill. Now, for those of you listening who are not that familiar with BirdLife South Africa, just a quick run through. We are the only NGO in South Africa that is fully dedicated to conserving South Africa's birds and their natural habitats. And we do this through scientifically based programs that support sustainable and equitable use of our natural resources. But one of our absolute key missions is to make sure that we encourage people to enjoy and value nature. The only way that we're going to save our natural world is if people find value in that natural world. And so it is really important to us that we really teach people that message and help spread the love of nature. BirdLife South Africa is also the country partner of BirdLife International. Now, BirdLife International is a global partnership and it is really for nature and people. And the BirdLife Partnership is really a family. Those of you who listened in to our debut webinar presented by our CEO, Mark Anderson, would have heard of the incredible work that the BirdLife Partnership has achieved across the world. It is a partnership of over 121 country partners, and this partnership really allows us to translate the lessons learned on the ground across this partnership at a global scale. And in doing so, we can achieve major conservation success. Some of you may have seen the petition going around that is led by BirdLife International to make a healthy natural world a human right and add this to the UN's Declaration of Human Rights. And we are in full support of that addition, and we hope that they really do manage to push that through. So Bird of the Year. This was a campaign started in 2007, and the debut Bird of the Year title holder was the humble African penguin. Now, the African penguin is a wonderful little creature. You can see him up in the top left of your screen over there. And Christina Hagen actually gave a phenomenal talk a couple of weeks ago all about our penguin work down in De Hoop Nature Reserve, where we are establishing a brand new breeding colony for these birds. So if you missed that and you missed Mark's talk, please hop onto the YouTube channel where you can catch up on some of the presentations that have gone already. Some of the other birds that we've also had include the likes of the barn swallow. And the really important thing about these Bird of the Year campaigns is that they are designed to raise awareness, and we use these flagship birds to really highlight some of the important conservation issues going on around the world. So with the barn swallow, we were really looking at highlighting migrant challenges and also just migrant species in general and the role that they play in the ecosystem. Our CEO has done a lot of work on the lesser flamingo. You can see Mark Anderson's amazing photograph there. That and the white-winged flufftail were really highlighting the plight of our wetlands and our wetland birds. Our wetlands are one of the most threatened ecosystems in South Africa. And so using these really important birds, we're able to highlight just what's happening to our wetland conservation in South Africa. The lappet-faced vulture was 2017's Bird of the Year, and vultures are arguably one of our most threatened groups of birds in the world. They provide enormous ecosystem services for us, and unfortunately we are losing them at a scary rate. Last year, one of my absolute favorite birds, no knock to the Southern Ground-Hornbill, the Secretarybird held the title, and 2019 was certainly a phenomenal year for the species. We raised a ton of awareness, and I'll show you a little bit later some of the incredible conservation research that we were able to achieve. But on to 2020. This year, the title goes to probably one of the most beloved terrestrial species. Who wouldn't envy those eyelashes? I mean, this really is a gorgeous bird, and that extremely large beak that is very important to their life cycle and their ability to hunt and catch prey. What a species. So we're very proud to have the Southern Ground-Hornbill as our 2020 Bird of the Year. Now, one of the things we do as BirdLife South Africa with our Bird of the Year campaign is to create a range of educational and awareness materials. Now, those of you who are readers of African BirdLife, the magazine, will have likely received your annual copy that includes a poster of the Bird of the Year. These posters are distributed across South Africa to schools, to community groups, and they're really designed to help give a synopsis of the species, talk about their ecology, their biology, as well as some of the conservation challenges and successes that are being driven around the world. So really nice poster this year. If you are involved in education or you are part of a bird hide or a bird club that would like to distribute these posters, once we're back up and running out of lockdown, please feel free to reach out to BirdLife South Africa, and we'll be happy to send through some posters to you so that you can help stick them up around the country. Some of the other fun material that we like to create is infographics. So this is largely designed for our social media platforms. And every couple of weeks, you will see a new infographic going out, which helps raise awareness about different aspects of our Bird of the Year. We're doing this in collaboration with Caitlin Judge. And as I said, Hans Hohausen Charitable Trust is really helping to fund this aspect of the Bird of the Year campaign. So Caitlin's done a phenomenal job of really highlighting some of these key points in a fun and creative way. And we hope that people, both young and old, can go out and read these infographics and quickly learn a little bit more about these amazing birds. Moving on to the slightly more hardcore educational material, I know many parents, thanks to lockdown, have been thrust into the role of teacher. If you are looking for something to do with your kids at home, this is a phenomenal set of education material that has been put together by Caitlin. It is very accessible and very easy to use. So she's created fact sheets that match up with structured lesson plans that are about an hour long. There's links to different YouTube videos and then a range of different questions for each aspect of the bird's biology that these lesson plans will teach you. And the wonderful thing about all of this information is that it is completely free to download. You can visit our website at birdlife.org.za/birdoftheyear2020, and you can get access to a whole range of these education materials and hopefully spend an hour or two with your kids learning about these wonderful Southern Ground Hornbills. You can also access some of our previous Bird of the Year material, ranging back through secretarybirds, vultures, and even the African black oyster catcher. So those of you who are looking for things to do with your kids that are fun and educational, I really recommend going to check this out. And then, of course, possibly one of my most favorite parts of the Bird of the Year campaign is our collectibles. So I don't have my video on at the moment, but I'm wearing proudly my pin badge. These are 35 Rand and available from our shop for the birds. And of course, who wouldn't want to own their very own Thunder fluffy Southern Ground Hornbill? And I've got Thunder sitting next to me on my desk at the moment as well. These are wonderful items. They make great gifts, birthday and Christmas gifts, or just because gifts. And I really encourage everyone to reach out to Shop for the Birds to make sure that they get their own pin badges and their own fluffies. And unfortunately with lockdown, we're currently not shipping, but please do reach out to Shop for the Birds and we can put you on a waiting list to make sure that as soon as we are shipping, we can get those items to you. Now that's enough of a merchandise plug. Let's get on to some interesting facts about these wonderful Southern Ground Hornbills. Now, their scientific name is Bucorvis leadbeaterei, and a gentleman by the surname Viggers described these birds to science in 1825. Now, let's break that name down a little bit. So I'm pretty sure not all of you speak Latin. So if we have a look at the first part, Bucorvis, in green, you'll see bu is linked largely to a word that relates to large oxen. So we really think that he was trying to use that large part, and corvus, of course, means raven-like. So the first part of this bird's name is a large raven-like bird. And then the second part of the name, leadbeaterei, is taken after an old ornithologist who lived in the 1700s and early 1800s, Mr. Benjamin Leadbeater. And he had an enormous collection of bird skins in London. And Viggers went along and managed to take one of the Southern Ground Hornbill skins in his collection and describe the Southern Ground Hornbill to science. So that is where that scientific name comes from. Now, many people, when I throw up this phylogenetic tree, want to run away because it's very complicated. All you need to know here is that our Southern Ground Hornbills are right over there alongside the likes of mousebirds, kingfishers, toucans, and trogons. And their closest living group, of course, is our Tocus hornbills. And if we look a little bit beyond that, beyond our sort of hornbill group and family, their nearest relatives after that are in fact the hoopoes. So really interesting looking at where they fit on the phylogenetic tree of life. There are currently 2 living species of ground hornbill. The first one being the Abyssinian or northern ground hornbill. That is the bird you can see on the left side of your screen. They have quite blue faces with a little bit of red and a very serious casque on the top of their bills. They are very similar in structure otherwise to the Southern Ground Hornbill, as you can see on the right-hand side of your screen, who has an all-red face. Now, interestingly, female Northern Ground Hornbills have a completely blue face, while female Southern Ground Hornbills have a very small blue patch on their throats. Now, if we look at the ranges of these 2 species, you'll see that our Northern Ground Hornbills in the blue occupy the Sahel region just south of the Sahara Desert. If we consider their conservation status, they are currently listed as vulnerable, but similarly to our Southern Ground Hornbills, very little is known in terms of the population numbers of these birds. They are quite widely spread, and there's still a lot of research that needs to be put in to really understand how many Northern Ground Hornbills are left. Likewise, with the Southern Ground Hornbill, a global population estimate is not really known at the moment. However, in South Africa, we're very lucky that we have a relatively good handle on how many birds are left in South Africa, and we estimate that at approximately 1,500 birds. And they are unfortunately listed as endangered in South Africa, and we've seen large declines in the species over the last 3 decades. If we take a look at their habitat, you'll see these are really savanna birds, and these birds really enjoy slightly wooded and slightly grassy habitat. They're obviously not looking for pure grassland, and they don't do well in heavily forested areas. And they don't like long grass either. They need to be able to hunt visually, and you can see those birds hunting through the sort of cleared area. They like to be able to see their prey so that they can catch it. Now, the Southern Ground Hornbill comes in at 1 meter tall, very, very big hornbill, and they weigh approximately 3.8 kilograms. They're also extremely long-lived birds, rivaling that the likes of the albatrosses, who are also clocked in at over 70 years old. So these really are sort of dinosaur-like ancient creatures that walk our earth for a very, very long time. Now, I forgive the slightly gory images, but they are ferocious predators, and you can see on the screen here a number of prey items which they are capable of catching. They use that incredible beak to catch venomous snakes, terrestrial snails, small mammals, even birds. And of course, we know them well for their ability to catch reptiles like chameleons, and of course, highly toxic scorpions. So really, really thuggish when it comes to predating on other creatures, but really talented at what they do. And we have to have mad respect for these birds. They really are good at hunting. Now, ground hornbills are what we call sexually dimorphic. So you'll see males are different from females. And the key difference here is that blue throat patch, which you can see on the bird on the left-hand side of this picture. And this picture was taken by Albert Froneman. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Albert. In terms of their social groups, groups are between 2 to 12 individuals, and typically each group will have an alpha pair, that is the alpha male and the alpha female, and these two birds will be supported by a host of younger beta males. So young female Southern Ground Hornbills are kicked out of their family groups at quite a young age, but the rest of the group remains supported by these beta males. And the key thing for these beta males to do is to act as helpers in rearing up chicks during the breeding season. So they will help forage and bring food into the nest, and also help defend the territory against rival hornbill groups. So these family groups are very tightly knit, and often up to 50% of young males that grow up in a group will stay with that group, and they won't disperse away to a new territory. Now, if we start to consider the conservation of the Southern Ground Hornbill, one of the biggest players in this space is, of course, the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project. And we're very lucky to have them as our BirdLife species guardians. Now, what is a species guardian? A species guardian is a person or a group of people who are highly dedicated to the conservation of a specific species. So BirdLife at the moment has 4 species guardians. Technically 5, because we have 2 for the Cape parrot, but we also have species guardians for the black harrier as well as the Taita falcon. We're very grateful to all of our species guardians who assist us not just with conservation efforts in the field, but a lot of monitoring and research as well. And so they really do help us extend our capacity as BirdLife South Africa to be able to work on some of these specialist birds. So if we look at the Southern Ground Hornbill's conservation, unfortunately, as I said, their population has had an over 50% decline in the past 3 decades. And in 2015, when Eskom produced the Red Data Book of birds, they were classified as endangered. If we have a look at what this means in terms of their distributions, you can see that big blue outline is sort of their historical distribution. And the black and gold are really the areas where the species has been confined to in modern times. Those golden areas are largely the protected area network, and then the black areas are more sort of home range areas, agricultural spaces, and areas outside of formal protected areas. Now, sadly, with the declines that we are seeing in these hornbills, they are teetering a very fine line, and we don't want to see them slipping into critically endangered in the next assessment, of the Red Data Book coming up shortly in the next year or two. So Mabula and BirdLife certainly have their work cut out for them to make sure that that doesn't happen. And one of the ways that we are trying to monitor these birds, we had a few people asking earlier, is through the likes of the app BirdLife. Now, this year, as we did last year, we have created a Bird of the Year challenge. We've had 70 records from 20 observers so far, largely centered on the Kruger National Park, but we do know that these birds do occur all the way down to the Eastern Cape, and we're hoping that after tonight's webinar, more people will join on to this platform, and once we hopefully all get out of lockdown, will enable us to start recording even more sightings of these birds. And this kind of data is really critical for Mabula, who are monitoring exactly where these birds occur. Now, if you are interested in getting involved in the BirdLife challenge, it is really simple. Step one, you just need to download the BirdLife app. Some of you may have taken part in the lockdown challenge earlier this lockdown. It was a lot of fun. All you have to do, very simple to use app, get BirdLife on your phone and hit log, and your species will come through to the database. In order to get going with this event, you need to just drop Ernst Retief at birdlife.org.za an email. Ernst can add you to the BirdLife challenge, and then all you need to do is go birding. And hopefully those of you who are in slightly wilder places can do this from your balconies during lockdown. If you see a Southern Ground Hornbill, step 5, log that sighting of your hornbill, and that will automatically get uploaded to the Bird of the Year challenge. And those of you who are interested in following this challenge can jump onto birdlife.com/events/SGHB2019, and you'll be able to follow all of the progress with the Southern Ground Hornbill Bird of the Year challenge. Now, just to show you what happened last year, this was the first year that we'd ever done a BirdLife Bird of the Year challenge. And in the 2019 Secretarybird Bird of the Year challenge, we managed to secure over 800 sightings of secretarybirds across South Africa. This is the single biggest data set of secretarybird sightings ever collected, and we are extremely grateful to all of the people who contributed to last year's challenge. And we hope that many more of you will go out and contribute to this year's challenge. These kinds of data allow us to do updated population estimates, really fine-scale modeling of where our birds are, and it really helps guide us to focus on specific conservation areas that help protect these species. So please, I urge all of you to get out there and start using your BirdLife apps to help us keep tabs on where our birds are. Now, unfortunately, it is a dangerous world for our Southern Ground Hornbills, and many of the threats that I'm going to tell you about are, of course, related to a lot of human activities. This is a species that is involved in local wildlife trade, and unfortunately, they are no stranger to persecution. They are notorious for knocking out people's windows when they see a reflection. Because they are highly territorial, they will attack that window and try and get rid of the intruder male, and that can lead to a lot of animosity between them and people. And so because of human-wildlife conflict, we do see persecution of these birds. Loss of habitat is a major threat for the Southern Ground Hornbill. You can see just south of Kruger National Park, one of our hotspots, this monocrop of sugarcane is unfortunately not suitable for Southern Ground Hornbills to forage in when it is growing thick, and that eliminates large tracts of land for these birds. Likewise, there's also loss of habitat within our protected areas. Kruger unfortunately has many elephants, and we know that that is a hot potato topic, but the high densities of elephants are leading to loss of our big trees. And when we lose those big trees, it doesn't just affect hornbills, it also affects a lot of our big raptors who use those big trees for nesting. So loss of nesting trees is a really big threat, and Lucy is going to tell you some of the creative ways that Mabula are working to try and solve that threat for our Southern Ground Hornbills. Habitat management is also a big threat. When landowners do certain management activities on their properties, this can lead to a densifying of woody encroachment. This is what we call bush encroachment. And that can also cause, as you can see on that fence line in the top left, that can cause the landscape to look very different. The area on the left-hand side would be great for Southern Ground Hornbills. The area on the right, not so much. So it's really important that our property managers are very conscious of what their management activities, whether it be burning or grazing, the impacts that that is having on their landscape and how that might influence the types of birds that you'd be able to find on those properties. Now, Megan Lofty-Eaton in 2017 did a wonderful study looking at the percentage of woody cover. So if you have a look at the x-axis on that graph, so that's the axis at the bottom of your screen, that's showing the percentage of woody cover where 0 would be a grassland and 100 would be a forest. And what she found was that the optimal conditions for these birds lie between 20 to 40% woody cover. They can, of course, tolerate around 10%, but anything over 50% woody cover, we start to see a dramatic decline in the presence of southern ground hornbills. The canopy just gets too dense, and it really is tricky for them to find those optimal foraging conditions. As I said earlier, habitat management can be a very large threat. Overgrazing can lead to degradation in the landscape, which then obviously reduces your prey base. There's no way for your small rodents or your insects to build their homes, and that can influence our southern ground hornbills. Likewise, they are unfortunately susceptible to electrocution. They are very inquisitive birds, and often they will land on top of transformer boxes or pylons, and they will touch live wires with their beaks and sadly succumb to the electrocution from that contact. They are also unfortunately susceptible to secondary poisoning. So often what will happen is farmers will put out laced carcasses to try and get rid of jackals or other scavenging predators that they don't want on their properties. Southern ground hornbills will come across those carcasses, and being prone to taking an easy meal, they will unfortunately ingest poison and then unfortunately often die. And of course, sorry for another gruesome picture, lead ammunition. We've got a team working at BirdLife South Africa, headed up by almost doctor, hopefully, she's working on her PhD at the moment, Linda van den Heever, who is looking at the impacts of lead toxicosis on our vulture species. And she's collaborated a bit with Lucy on the impacts of lead on hornbills. And sadly, as with people, when lead is ingested, it has huge implications for our physiological capabilities, so our health deteriorates, and often a lot of neurological impact. So birds are not able to function fully, and of course we all know the wild is a tough place. If a bird is not functioning optimally, they're going to run into trouble. And so by ingesting lead from discarded offal of hunting carcasses, it can have a really big impact on not just our southern ground hornbills, but also some of our other scavengers like our vultures. But luckily there is hope. And to give you the brighter side of the story, I'm now going to hand over to Dr. Lucy Kemp, who's going to tell you a little bit more about the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project and some of the incredible success that the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project has achieved over the last few years. So Lucy, over to you. Thank you very much.
See, you've used my Land Rover picture, which means immediately all Toyota fans will be tuning out of this talk. But I hope we can keep everyone interested and talk about these amazing, incredible birds. Next slide, please. So before I start, I just want to make it very clear that although I'm the one speaking, ground hornbill conservation involves a huge number of institutions, agencies and groups. They're a really difficult species to try and work with. They don't do a lot in their own favor. And so everything that we do is collaborative. And I just want to get that across at the start. Thanks. Next slide. So these birds are incredible. They're ecologically important, they're culturally important. Wherever you go in the range, they're known as the rainbird or the thunderbird, associated with good rains, and a really integral part of our African savanna landscapes. Next slide. So this is the sort of baseline map that we're working off at the moment, and it doesn't look great, but if you look at the top arrow, that is a population of hope for us. We've seen a slow growth in the Limpopo River Valley population over the last 20 years. That population was pretty much entirely wiped out due to the government policy of giving out strychnine for farmers to deal with rabies vectors like jackals and things, and also severe drought. But slowly, just given time and space, that population is bouncing back. And so for us, that really is a symbol of hope, and that if we keep doing what we're doing, they will with time come back. Then the next arrow down, you can pretty much see the outline of Kruger in those sightings. And that indicates to us very clearly that the problem is us, unfortunately, people. And so we need to remedy what we're doing on our landscapes in order to try and get that sort of contiguous population back. Then the next arrow down is pointing to a growing gap between Southern Kruger and Northern Zululand. There's one, possibly two groups left in Swaziland, so they're essentially extinct in Swaziland. And what we've lost is the gene flow from the Southern Kruger population down into the rest of the country. And with that comes risks of small populations and everything that that entails. So with time, we're going to be looking to see how we can close that gap again. And then in the very bottom arrow just shows how incredibly fragmented the Eastern Cape population is. And obviously that has a lot of heightened extinction risks with it. And so we need to look to see how we can better protect that population in particular. Next slide, please. And for the longest time, I think we had this idea of hornbills in Kruger, and I think that's where almost everyone has probably had their first sightings of them, just striding down the roads and part of everyday Kruger life. But I think this image probably portrays better what a natural habitat for ground hornbills is, and that is sharing the landscape with people. They are very integral part of rural landscapes. They walk between villages, between homesteads, amongst cattle. And because of the cultural protection afforded them in so many parts of Africa, that is what has kept the remaining fragmented populations going. Next slide. So we've been working to try and understand what's happening with the population overall. So the pie graph, the yellow shows the areas outside, the percentage of the population outside of protected areas, whereas the green is the percentage of the population within formal protected areas. And with that, we mostly talk about the Greater Kruger area. And so we did some modeling to see what the extinction risk is for the species, looking at these different land uses. And if we look at the protected side on the right, the green, in formal protected areas, the dark blue graph continues to grow and will sustain from the low baseline. And areas where the birds are persisting in communal areas, but where they have cultural protection, those birds are also going to tick on just fine. There will be some losses, maybe to rat poison, the odd hunting, but the offtake is really low. But then if you look on the left-hand side, all those other graphs are crashing down to extinction with time. And that's across commercial game, commercial agriculture, and in communal areas where the birds no longer have that enhanced cultural protection. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to try and tackle. The birds breed slowly. They've got a lot going against them, mostly from us, you know, all the nasties we throw at them. And so we sort of work off 6 different focus areas in the project. The most important one is monitoring, because if we don't know what we've got, we don't know where to focus our attention and what sort of conservation actions to bring to bear. We need to mitigate as many of the threats as possible. We need to try and restore the population in areas where they've become locally extinct or where populations are incredibly fragmented. We need to also try and get awareness out as much as possible. And then the last one, improve, is for us just how we can improve ourselves as a project and how we can continue to do the best sort of conservation planning, using science as best we can, and just make sure that we're really maintaining our highest levels so that we can do the best for the species. Next slide, please. So the monitoring, I think Mel gave a really good introduction about why monitoring is so important. And ground hornbills are incredibly hard to census. Each family group needs about 100 square kilometers within the South African habitat context. And so the chances of seeing your resident group, even if you go out repeatedly for many days in a week, is actually really low. And so for us to try and census and monitor the population, we rely on everyone's eyes out there. Interested birders, landowners, farmers, communities, and without people reporting their resident birds that live in their area, it'll be very very hard for us to get a really solid understanding of what it is we're dealing with. So things like BirdLife is really amazing. And we've also formed a system of champions, which are essentially people who are in love with the birds, who have some time that they want to put towards the monitoring. And the champions have WhatsApp groups, which basically in an area, say Crichton area, someone started a group, and that group is now built over time, including landowners and interested people within that area. And so we're getting amazing data from these. We've got about 13 of these groups up. And so if anyone is interested in their area, particularly if you're in some of these rural areas where we're not getting a lot of the sightings, we'd welcome your input on that. Next slide, please. So, you know, so it's trying to get sightings from the more rural places where typically we don't get a lot of birders going in. Next slide, please. And the way we're trying to do this, we needed to come up with a system that would be really low resource and low data needed, but will still give us the answers that we need. So we're working at a pentad scale, which is about 8 kilometers by 8 kilometers. And that roughly equates to 1 ground hornbill territory. So we're taking that if a group is seen within a pentad, that pentad goes green. Indicating that there's a functional, viable group. And if they see in year on year on year on year, then that pentad remains green. And so that's not an area that we're going to worry about. If you look at my example, pentad B and C, because ground hornbills are hard to see and there is a good chance you might not see them within a year, this 4-year cycling system that we've come up with means you can miss them for a year or two, as long as at the end of that 4 years, they've been seen more than once. And then that takes us, you know, and then those remain green. The worry areas where if a group has been exterminated within the cycle, those will then flag red, and where we start to see clusters of red on the map, we will know then where to focus our efforts and try and understand what's going on. Is it a disease outbreak? Is someone hunting for trade? What is going on in that area? And then that way we can target our resources. And then hopefully equally on the more positive side, we'll be able to find perhaps groups that haven't been reported before from some of these deep rural areas, and also start to regreen as the education program takes effect, and as these birds become safer, hopefully they will disperse into new pentads, and we'll actually start over the 4-year period, hopefully start adding green pentads to the system. Next slide, please. So we do a lot of mitigation work, and just 2 of the examples is artificial nests and window breaking. Given that Mel gave me 20 minutes to try and cover everything we do, I'm just going to focus on the artificial nests, but there's a lot more information if you like on our website. Next slide, please. Nests, loss of nests is one of the big limiting factors, even in the protected areas. The birds need a big hollow, 40 to 50 centimeters, preferably with a 6 centimeter diameter, 6 meters high to make sure it's nice and predator safe. You know, in the initial stages of the project, and also with collaborators of ours, we've been using wooden nests, and the problem with them is that they have rotted after sort of 10 years. So from a long-term sustainability point of view, we thought that probably isn't going to work. We can't sort of run around the landscape every 10 years replacing every nest. So we started investigating artificial materials, and we worked with the University, Tshwane University of Technology, with the Industrial Design Department. And what we came up with is this system. It looks a bit like a dinosaur egg. Initially, we started constructing the nests by hand, cutting them, but it was really messy and quite tricky. And we've now progressed onto a robotic arm doing the cutting, so we can sort of pull together almost like a puzzle that slots together of the ISO board, which provides the insulation for the nests. Next slide. And the fun thing with this is we've been able to involve volunteers. So these are some of the students from the TUT Industrial Design Department. And we have sort of nest building weekends, which means putting these together and then covering them with resin. So here you can see a whole suite of nests ready to go out. And, you know, it's fun because we get to engage the youth of South Africa, but also we're producing a nest that hopefully is actually climate proof going forward. Because what we found is that in these very hot spells that we've been having recently, these sort of very long these long periods of intense heat, 44 degrees for 2 weeks in a row, those eggs are actually dying mid-incubation. And so what we're hoping is this is actually future-proofing the nest, and that these are providing much better sorry, I'm reading one of the comments as I talk, much better isolation, and make sure that those eggs maintain the right temperature so that we're not losing any eggs to heat effects. Next slide, please. And this is a video shared by some of our collaborators at the Fitzpatrick Institute, Carl Middleton. And this is one of the nests in action. It was one of the first nests that we field tested. And here you can see the new fledgling starting to look out at the world and explore. That was on the 4th of April. So any day, well, he should be out by now. But at least, you know, it's been nice for us to have successful breeding and have the birds take to them. That group took to that nest within 2 weeks of us installing it. So that was a really nice feedback for us after a long year of nest breeding. Next slide, please. Okay, so on the restoration side, this is where we're trying to restore groups into areas where they've become locally extinct. So what we're doing is we harvest the second hatch chicks. Ground hornbills lay 2 eggs on average. You know, sometimes there'll be 3, but that egg is usually much smaller and often doesn't hatch. And this is a natural insurance policy for the groups, because they put in about 6 months worth of effort into the whole breeding cycle, from preparing the nest and courtship through to fledging a chick. So it's an enormous amount of their time. It's half the year dedicated to this. And so if something's wrong with that first chick, which hatches about 5 or 6 days before the second chick, if something's wrong with that first one, if it's not eating properly, if it's born with a deformity, they will just ignore that first chick and they'll raise the second chick. However, if that first chick is good and strong, they will then just neglect the second chick. And so essentially that second chick dies of parental neglect. And this happens every time. We've been monitoring nests now since 1966, and we're yet to have a case where these birds are able to fledge 2 chicks successfully. And what this does is provide for us essentially a free stock of birds with which to do the restoration. So normally in a reintroduction program, you're taking wild animals from one place and moving them to another place. And obviously that has some negative impact on the source population that you're taking from. But with this, it has no negative impact on the remaining group. And so we're basically doubling productivity of the wildness, and it gives us the source of birds to work with in reintroducing them back into areas where they've become locally extinct. Next slide, please. So there you can see on the left-hand picture, there's the second egg still waiting to hatch, and that chick is already probably 4 days old. Its skin's already gone dark. And that's a fat, healthy chick. And so when that second egg pips, as it is in the picture on the right, that's when we would take that. It's really important that we're able to get to those eggs within the first 2 days of hatch. Otherwise, they get quite compromised with parental neglect. Dehydration starts to set in. And so it's quite critical to time that right. And I'll talk about that in a bit. But over the years, it's taken a long time to get the hand rearing right, to be able to raise physically strong birds, but it's taken us a lot longer to get it right from a physiological and behavioral point of view. Next slide, please. There's 5 aviaries, and the little white windows on the top floor that you can see there, those are the nests. So when we bring chicks from the wild, they go into those nests and they only interact with the ground hornbills in the aviaries that sort of span out from those nests. So that way there's very minimal human interaction. Those birds are raised wild. This is at Loskop Dam in partnership with the Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Agency. So there's very, very little people presence. And those birds we found are of the quality that we have much better success with the reintroductions. They're not human in printed, and so we're giving them the best possible chance of surviving. If you'd like to see that full video and get a much better idea of that video, you can just go to the Mabula Ground Hornbill Project YouTube channel, and that video is there, and you get a much better idea of that. Next slide, please. All right, so then with the research side, next slide, please. The more we learn about these birds, the more we realize there's still a lot that we don't know, and we have to go back to learning some more. So some of the things we've learned in the last few years, we're now able to candle eggs, and we're able to age the embryos, and that means we're able to go back on exactly the day that that chick hatches, without multiple visits to the nest. So we've been able to reduce our nest visitation to just one visit until we come back at harvest. So that means we're reducing disturbance at the nest as much as possible. And now we're also able to actually, if you look at the egg on the right hand side, you can see some thin red veins in the middle, and we're now able to actually drill into that egg and extract blood from the embryo so that we can DNA sex to make sure that we're harvesting the right demographics, because ground hornbill groups typically only have one adult female in a group, and the rest of them, the birds in the group, are male helpers. And so over the years, what we've ended up with is a surplus of females, because each female needs an army of males to keep her safe. And so this way we can now harvest exactly for the demographics that we need. Next slide, please. This paper just came out now, and this was work done at that center at the Baobab, and that was looking at how hornbills are able to radiate heat. So this is part of a bigger climate change project that we're doing. Ground hornbills are incredibly intolerant of heat. They start showing heat loss behavior at 26 degrees Celsius, and from this infrared image you can see those birds offloading their heat through the bill, through the facial skin, and also through that throat skin. And what we found is they're offloading that heat from as low as 22 degrees Celsius, and they're able to offload up to 75% of their basal metabolic rate. So they really are able to just shunt heat out through their beak and their bill. And so this helps us understand then how climate change is going to impact them in the future. We already know from an analysis we did of all of Africa that they're going to lose 40% of their habitat will no longer be suitable with the climate change estimates going forward. So this is going to help us understand how to also climate proof or future proof our conservation planning. Next slide, please. And then, you know, we've been at the reintroductions for a long time. It's been slow learning, a lot of trial and error, because they're so socially complex and cooperative breeding. There's a lot of complexity built into that. And so what we've just published now is looking back over the reintroductions, what worked, what hasn't worked, and making sure that going forward, we're using the best possible adaptive management, and hopefully we just keep going and getting the birds out. And good news, today we released another 3 birds onto Loskop Dam. So that's the second group to go out there. And one of the males is actually a successful dispersal from the first group that was released there. And that group has bred successfully 2 years in a row. So that's really nice. And so while we all still kind of in lockdown, there's another 3 ground hornbills let free. Next slide, please. And then also through the reintroductions, because we monitor these birds so closely, to make sure that they're safe, and they give us sleepless nights, but also there's just so much we can learn from an ecological point of view, because it's sort of, you know, pushing experimental behavior onto them. And so we've picked up things like kidnapping, which has never been reported for ground hornbills before. It's been suspected. And so this just, you know, adds to the complexity of the reintroductions, and these are all things we need to take into account. Next slide, please. And then this was amazing research done last year. That is Dr. Samara Donnell in the picture from France. And she has been working on the cognitive
Lucy, I've lost you there. Sorry, everyone. Lucy is coming to us from the bush, so I think she might have just had an internet whoopsie. She did ask me to step in if we did hit the snag. So just to elaborate a bit more on this until Lucy's able to join us again, Samara's been doing some absolutely incredible behavioral tests with Southern Ground Hornbills, looking at trying to understand their cognition behavior and whether they're able to create or conduct a task that will allow them to get a reward through this really interesting trial setup. And it turns out that Southern Ground Hornbills are actually really phenomenal birds and very, very clever and good at what they do. So that's what that experiment was all about. Moving forward, there we go. And they've also been doing some amazing work with Elephants Alive. Robin from Wits University, who's now full-time at Elephants Alive, is doing some wonderful work with bees and trying to protect marilla trees in particular, using beehives to allow to prevent the elephants from coming through and pushing these large trees over. As I said earlier, we need the trees to be able to allow these birds to breed. Sorry, I'm just seeing a message here from Lucy. She's lost her connection. She'll try and join us shortly. So I'll just hold down the fort until she's back with us. But essentially, these amazing marilla trees in particular in the low veld are very susceptible to being pushed over by elephants. And so using bees, which elephants are quite afraid of, we're able to hang these hives in the trees, and they're having really good success at protecting these birds, these elephants, the trees from the elephants. Now, in terms of awareness, Mabula's been doing some wonderful awareness work. We know what an amazing cultural icon the Southern Ground Hornbill is. And so you can see this wonderful mascot that they have created, and Mabula goes out to schools right throughout South Africa, through KwaZulu-Natal in particular, working with local school children to get them excited about the ground hornbill, teach them the basics about the birds and why it's important to protect them. Also feeding into the whole Thunderbird culture. We know with the Zulu and the Xhosa cultures in South Africa, this is a really revered bird and very, very much respected as the bringer of the rains. So that cultural protection really does afford the bird quite a lot of protection from these rural communities. And so Mabula's done a wonderful job of leveraging that. They've also been able to do some wonderful work with a cartoon artist, and they've created some fun stories, which are all available on their Mabula YouTube channel. You can go and watch these wonderful stories, and I think they are in multiple languages, if I remember correctly.
I'm back.
You're back. Do you want to take on from here?
Hi. Sorry, everyone. I have no idea what happened. I just lost complete signal. Yes, so education. So the previous slide was an animation that we had done, which tells the story of a little girl called Knowledge, who meets this ground hornbill in her dreams. And basically they walk through the landscape together, learning about the different threats to each other and how they can support each other. So it's a really fun way of getting it across. And good news for us during lockdown is Dr. John Carney, who did some of the voiceovers in The Lion King, is going to help us with some of the Zulu and some of the other voiceovers. So it'll be super exciting, and we're hoping that the kids will be able to then share this on their phones. So hopefully that's a nice way for kids to share this information. Next slide. And then also we've brought out this voice of the ground hornbill guardian. This time it's a little boy who meets a ground hornbill. They walk through the landscape and they learn about the threats to hornbills, and if you make your village safe, the rains will come back. And these have gone down really well, not just with the children. We work a lot with traditional authority councils, and the elders feel that this is a really nice way of bridging that generation gap. And so, yeah, so it's been very well received, and obviously we'll just monitor and make sure it's having the desired effect. Next slide, please. So yeah, okay, I'm at the end. I lost a bit in the middle. But yeah, I mean, I have to thank all of our sponsors. Please go to our website to see them all. This is just some of them. They wouldn't all fit on the screen. People have supported us over the years in bits and pieces, in kind, with equipment, with fuel, whatever it is. And we wouldn't be able to do the work that we do without all of them. Next slide.
Great, so I'm going to jump in here and just give everyone one more reminder. Get your fluffies. Thank you so much, Lucy. I really do appreciate you giving up your Tuesday evening to join me and spread the Southern Ground-Hornbill love. Lucy's team has started a Thunderbird Thursdays hashtag. So on Thursdays, please go and share your photographs and sightings of these amazing birds. You can also tag them as the bird of the year. And hopefully we can get some of those really great pictures up onto our social media platforms as BirdLife and Mabula to make sure that we're sharing all of the Thunderbird love that we can. We've put up all our social media hashtags, emails, our websites. Please, if you want to know more about this project, jump onto the internet and drop us an email if you have any specific questions. And I really just want to once again thank Hans Hohausen Charitable Trust, who've been great supporters of the Bird of the Year campaign. We wouldn't be able to bring you what we're bringing you this evening without their support. And of course, a huge thank you to my co-presenter, Dr. Lucy Kemp. Thank you for giving up your time this evening. And just before we take questions, I'd like to remind everybody that they are going to be seeing a survey pop up in their web browsers as they depart from the webinar this evening. Please take those 2 minutes just to fill that in. And we really do hope that if you are enjoying these webinar series, that you'll consider dropping a small donation. It really doesn't need to be anything big. Every little bit helps us keep these things going. We are powering these through Quicket. You can see either a website link, or those of you who like QR codes are welcome to scan that QR code and drop us any small donation. It'll always help us in bringing you these wonderful webinars. Now, just a plug for next week's talk, we've got Duncan McKenzie, who is a member of BirdLife Lowveld, one of our BirdLife affiliated clubs. He's going to be giving you a virtual tour of Kruger Park's birds. And I'm sure those of you who have been in lockdown and are really missing the bush, this is one not to be missed. It'll give you lots of nostalgia. And if you'd like to register for that talk, just hop on over to our BirdLife website and you can get the link for that. Now, as I said, you'll see in the Q&A box that you can upvote questions. I'm going to quickly open that up, so bear with me for 1 second. So if you guys would like to have certain questions asked first, I see our top one at the moment is asked by Masha, and she's asking, have you ever tried to release birds from zoo populations, i.e. from a board? Lucy, I'm going to let you go for this one.
All right. So Masha, hi. For those of you who haven't seen the amazing coloring in page on our social media recently, Masha is an artist in Moscow who did the most beautiful illustration for us. So if you haven't seen it, please go and download it. For anyone, it's nice for anyone to color in. But back to your question. So Masha, no, we haven't. And the reason for that is genetics. Most of the birds in the international zoo population are from Tanzania. And although they're not considered proper subpopulations, they are basically too distinct for us to use them. So we're sticking to using the birds from South Africa for that. But what we are working towards is an international stud book, where those birds that are of Southern African origin, that we try and pair those, and then what we can do is fly eggs out and have them reared at that Baobab center so that they also have all the right behaviors and aren't imprinted in any way. So that's the only way we'd be able to do that from international zoo populations.
Thanks, Lucy.
I hope that answers.
I see Dr. Leslie Hoy, one of our partners from Rand Water, has asked, can you please explain the kidnapping statement a little bit more? I think this is in response to your released birds being kidnapped.
Right, okay. So that was when we'd suspected it happened, because when these birds have territorial interactions, they hide the youngsters and leave them behind. So only the big boys and mum come in to fight. And the babies are left behind, and we've had incidents where we've thought perhaps something had funny gone on, but then when we released, it was the first time we'd reintroduced neighboring groups. So this was the first time we're now trying to sort of interfere with territoriality, and what happened was the pair stashed their youngster, went off to start exploring their new terrain, and the resident group on Mabula moved about 8 kilometers from where their nest is, so way beyond their territorial boundaries, and they stole that youngster and brought it back, and he's still very much part of the group. So he was stolen and has been very much part of the group, and part of he's just been welcomed in. So what we suspect, looking at the literature, is that was done to reduce the strength of the neighboring group. so that they are now weaker because they just appear and therefore they're less of a threat to the territory.
Absolutely fascinating. The social dynamics of these birds are so incredible, and you guys keep learning more and more about them. It's wonderful, Lucy. Our next question is from Kish Chetty, our very good friend and supporter from ESCOM. Kish is asking, are there plans to reintroduce southern Kruger restoration birds, and he's put in brackets, if any are taken, into the northern KZN to try and strengthen the gene pool?
All right, so prior to lockdown, we'd actually set up a workshop to try and look at how best to proceed with the reintroductions. You know, we have a limited stock. It's expensive to get these birds to the stage that they're ready to go out. So how can we plan reintroduction so that it has the best possible positive effect on the national population? And that was one of the sites that I was going to propose, is that we start reintroducing birds in that northern Zululand area. And then we're going to get a master's student up and running in Swaziland to really try and understand why those birds have been wiped out, and then to see if it's feasible to do reintroductions within Swaziland itself. At the moment, we're not harvesting from Kruger, but with our partners at the Fitzpatrick Institute, we are still harvesting from the APNR. So the birds would come from that southern Kruger stock. But with the genetic analysis that we did, actually we can move birds from anywhere within South Africa. So we could harvest in the Eastern Cape and release in Limpopo and vice versa without any genetic risk.
Great, thanks, Lucy. Then Sheldon's asking, how can one get involved in rehabilitation, and can reserves get involved?
Okay, so by rehabilitation, is that sick birds or injured birds?
I'm assuming so, yes.
Okay, so we actually get very few rehabilitated birds in. I think because they have such enormous territories, the chance of actually finding a sick or injured ground hornbill before it's too late is actually quite low. We do have quite a high success rate when we do get birds in, but you know, they go through honest appointments and then we try and rehab them. But actually, you know, if we get one bird every 2 to 3 years, it's a lot. But obviously, hopefully through this Bird of the Year program, and as people get more interested, hopefully we'll get the phone calls faster and sooner, and we can make a difference. In terms of the reintroductions, as soon as we've gone through this workshop, what we'll do is make it known where our key focal areas are, and then certainly we'll be looking for reserves within those key areas to come on board with the reintroductions.
Great. And then Wiggy is asking, are the artificial nests only put into trees, or are they attached to artificial structures?
At the moment, we've only put them into trees because we're putting them into wild areas. Because ground hornbills break windows, you wouldn't want to install one too close to your home because there's a good chance you'd lose your windows. But yeah, we haven't thought of sort of putting them on gum poles, if that's what you're asking. At the moment, it's just trees, and then with that collaboration with Elephants Alive, we also working with them to know and understand which are sort of trees that elephants aren't going to choose, and when we do put them up, we try and choose sort of non-target species for that, to make sure that we're reducing the risk of any elephant impact to the tree that we put the nest in.
Thanks, Lucy. Then we've got a question from Michelle Watson asking if we can expand on the hand rearing process. So are you hand feeding the young chicks, or are they being fed and adopted by the captive birds?
So we do both. We have the captive birds will foster if possible. So that's always first prize, to have them be parent reared. But then the hand rearing is done and in that case we would provide the food for the captive pairs. Obviously they need lots of tiny little snippety bits, and so we prepare endless bowls of those to give to the birds to then give to the chick. And then the hand rearing processes are the same. We have brooders, and we've sort of over the years refined the protocols, and we have about, if we get those chicks early, we have about a 90% success rate.
Great, that's really good odds. Well done, Lucy. Fee Evans is asking, how is the KZN population doing? Do you have sort of estimates on our KZN birds?
So there's probably, this is a guesstimate now, I'm just thinking back to the map, there's probably 100 groups in KZN, but because of the cultural protection, particularly from Zulu-speaking people, KZN actually has probably the biggest core population outside of Kruger. We're finding in those communal areas, those groups are big, above average, so groups of 5, 6 breeding successfully. So although there are still some risks in that landscape, they are essentially safe. And I always say if you're a ground hornbill born or hatched in South Africa, you want to be born in Kruger or onto Zulu-speaking land. There's just so much cultural protection going on there. And as a consequence, I think our population's in a much better place than it would be if there wasn't for that.
That's fantastic. And I think it's so great that you are leveraging that cultural protection for these birds, Lucy. Andrew Pearson's asking a question that almost leads on beautifully from last week's presentation. So he's asking, there are a number of proposed wind energy developments in the Eastern Cape, including rural Transkei. To what extent have you been able to obtain Southern Ground Hornbill sightings data from the bird specialist studies required for these projects?
Sure. Okay, that's a so I was called in as a specialist on one of those wind energy projects 2 years ago, I think. And what I found rather alarmingly is that the current EIA protocols are not very well planned for picking up ground hornbills. So that's something we're working with Sam and the team now, is to figure out how we can improve that so that the avian specialists going out, if they are ground hornbills in the area, if they are definitely picking them up, so that we know that they're noted. And also with that baseline map, the more people who will give us sightings, the better the map is, and the better that then influences the EIA process for those kind of things. That wind farm has gone ahead, despite the fact that that was one of the biggest contiguous populations in the Eastern Cape. And people just feel, well, a ground hornbill's never been injured or harmed by a wind farm, but this is the first time they're being put up within their range. So we're just monitoring as closely as we can. And sadly, I think it will take us losing birds to be able to influence that process in any way.
Thanks, Lucy. Now I'm going to give you a double question here. So the first one is from Penny Abbott asking, is it more difficult to reintroduce females? And Rian is then asking, what happens to the female birds in nature?
All right. So the young females get kicked out of the group on average when they're less than a year old. So they're really young and naive, and they basically have to go it alone. So they sort of live under the radar. They don't really call. Maybe they'll team up with some other females for safety, but you may even see them teaming up with a herd of impala or a troop of baboons for company. Ground hornbills are so social that they just hate being on their own. And so they basically then have to survive until they reach sexual maturity, which is from eight years onwards, and then they have to wait for a breeding position to come open in one of the groups. So it's really tough to be a female ground hornbill to start off with, but then once you're in a group, then you've got it made. You've got an army of males to feed you, defend you, look after your nest, fetch and carry. So initially it's not great, but it does get better. And then in terms of the reintroductions, it basically, I wouldn't say it's more difficult to introduce females. It just depends on whether the alpha male in the group that you're introducing them into actually takes a liking to that bird. Generally, we've been very successful with paired ones, but our resident group here, it took 2-3 months before he accepted one female into the group, and unfortunately she was killed in a big storm, and so we had to start the process again. But with the female he's got now, it was love at first sight. That was probably one of the easiest releases we've ever done.
I like that.
So there's a lot of individual personality stuff that has to be taken into account with these reintroductions as well, because sometimes one just won't like another one, and we can't figure out on any sort of scientific basis why that is.
Super. I've always been a big advocate that birds definitely have a level of personality. So nice to see that coming through in your work, Lucy. Now, Dr. Ali is asking, where in South Africa were Southern Ground Hornbills historically, and were they all over South Africa or just restricted to certain parts?
Yeah, so restricted, Mpumalanga, Limpopo, and sort of, basically a cusp around the east of the country, along KZN, sort of up to the escarpment, and then down into the Eastern Cape. Yeah, so, down to sort of Addo is about as far south as they go.
Great. And then we've got another one from Penny asking whether we have any updates on the Zimbabwe project and how that's going.
That's going. I'm waiting for for the BirdLife Zimbabwe team just to get back to us on that conservation plan. So we did a conservation planning exercise, sort of a preliminary one last year, but we found that there's a lot of data that we still need to pull together in order to put together a solid plan. But there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of love for the birds, there's a lot of keen young biologists there, ready to get going. So yeah, and I think we've learned a couple of hard lessons over the years, and it's nice to be able to share that and sort of avoid people wasting resources, and we're almost able to provide a toolkit, a conservation toolkit for other range states. And that's what we're starting to do. So we're in discussion with BirdLife Botswana now to set up a conservation planning exercise for them, and then hopefully onto Namibia. So hopefully we'll have then a cohesive conservation effort for the birds across their range.
That's fantastic, Lucy, and we're really looking forward to that. As we know, birds don't respect our borders, so great to see that we are working across country boundaries. Edward's asking, how successful is artificial incubating the eggs, and what is the percentage of releases into the wild? So I think you said earlier we had around 90% for that one.
So that's for the hand rearing. We don't actually do a lot of incubation because we're taking the chicks after they've already externally pipped, or they're already chicks. But some of our partners in the captive facilities like Monte Cassino have a lot of experience with incubation, and so that's that's fine. And we also know from the aviculture trade that moving eggs, flying eggs from here to there is also very doable. So I hope that answers that question.
Great. Then Hannah Bleeker is asking, have you found disease to play a role in decline of the wild population or as a problem in reintroduction?
So again, because the chance of finding sick birds in that huge home range is quite low, we don't often, get a chance to sample. But through the reintroduction program, we've learned that Newcastle's disease is a problem, and we've developed a vaccine for that that's used on the reintroduced birds, because we lost 2 birds in the early days to that. And it's really nice because you can actually give them boosters annually if required. And so now what we're busy doing is testing to see if there's an outbreak in somewhere like Kruger, would it be possible to quickly go out and vaccinate some of the birds around that infection area, so at least they may be to minimize the loss as such. And then through the reintroductions as well, we learned about the risk of lead ammunition, lead poisoning. We have successful chelation treatments for them, but obviously that's an ongoing and a bigger thing that we can tackle on our own. But we are part of the National Wildlife Poisoning Prevention Working Group, and within that there's a lead task force. So we are trying to tackle that at the highest level as well.
Great, yeah, and I think given the situation we all find ourselves in as humans with diseases, it's good to see that you are thinking of contingency plans when it comes to our birds. I see Andrew Pearson's dropped us a comment just to say that wind farm hasn't gone ahead just yet. The EA environmental authorization has been challenged, so there is a chance that it won't be built. Thanks, Andrew, for dropping that comment too.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. I got an email saying at least it was back within the system, but yeah, my understanding of what that means is maybe not as good as it should be. So hopefully at least it'll be reduced, if nothing else, because that is, we found about 8 contiguous groups, I think, in that. So yeah, sure. It would be quite a valuable site, and also vultures not far from that.
Definitely. Great. And then Mara's written in saying that she's observed some male Southern Ground-Hornbills in US zoos that have small patches of purple or blue on their throats. Now, some of you might remember I mentioned we have sexual dimorphism in males and females, and the females are typically the one with blue on their throats. Now, this is a thing I left out of our talk just to try and save a bit of time, but I'm going to let Lucy elaborate on the blue male theory. Go for it,
Yeah.
Lise.
Yeah, so I did think that when you said that. So we have noticed, and unfortunately, once we started looking for it, we started finding it even in the wild population. We are picking up males with female coloration. We had an MSc student working on that, Sophie Neller, through Honest Report. And what we managed to figure out is it's not testosterone. We think it's definitely some sort of endocrine response. And so we're just trying to raise funds now to try and keep going down the list of possible hormones. But through that, we did find that the females have quite high testosterone levels for birds. But we weren't actually able to answer why that is. And it's really important to understand because, you know, if can you be an alpha male and have blue, or does that somehow relegate you to being a beta male? Can you be sexually viable? So we're not really sure what that means, but we are seeing those birds both in the wild and in our captive population. And actually, the more we look at it, we're finding more blue males than pure red males.
Great. And then another one from Leslie asking, why do the hornbill groups need to have such large ranges? I think you said they have an average of 100 square kilometer range per group.
Yeah, so within South Africa, it's about 100 square kilometers, but the further north we go in the range, the density increases and those territories get smaller. I guess just a much more, you know, in that Nile Rift Valley, you know, much more productive habitats. But basically those birds are confined to that territory for their entire lives. And so that territory has to see them through both the good and the bad times. So if there's a massive fire that sweeps through, will there still be pockets where they're able to find food? In times of drought, will that big area have little pockets that will allow them to survive? So yeah, it's basically got to see them through both the good times and the bad times. And that's probably what's driving that big size. But then, as I said, the further north we go, places like Mana Pools, Gorongosa National Park, that drops to about 20 square kilometers. So it really is just that our habitat is quite marginal for ground hornbills, and it definitely gets better the further north you go in Africa.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucy. Now, Brian's asking whether the nests can be purchased.
No, but if you're interested in putting up a nest, please get hold of us. We are going to start running a nest adoption program. It costs about 6,000 Rand a nest to make, but then technically that nest is then there for the next 50 to 60 years. So it's a bit to get it up and running, but we're hoping that it's sort of a super nest, the best possible nest we can build for them. But if you feel that you have birds in your area and they might not have a viable nest, please drop me a line and we'll see what we can do.
Great. And then while we're talking costs, Tracy's asked what the cost of rearing these birds is on average.
Yeah, I've never worked that out. So essentially the costs involved would be the nest monitoring, which would be mostly fuel and camping, the harvest, which would be the transport, and then I guess just maintenance of that baobab center, the staff, the bird food and stuff like that. And then obviously the monitoring post-release. We've really got the cost down because we've made portable aviaries now, so that as we move to a new site, we just collapse the aviary from the last reintroduction and move it to the new place. So we don't have to keep building aviaries from scratch. So we are working to get the cost down. But maybe if you just drop me an email, I will work it out and get back to you on that.
Thanks, Lucy. And then Sheldon and Edward are asking along the lines of traditional medicine. How are the birds traded within the traditional medicine trade? And despite the positive cultural protection, are there some cases where there may be some negative impacts from the traditional medicine trade?
Yeah, I mean, sure, the birds are important because they're perceived to be really valuable. And so there is some offtake. What we are finding through our research, and we've been running a population and perceptions surveys, not just in South Africa, but across the range. And we're finding that the answers are very different depending on which language group you're speaking to. And even within that, there's very regional differences. But certainly in times of drought, in the Eastern Cape, birds are needed to bring the rain. But we've started chatting to traditional leaders, and increasingly people seem very happy to look at alternatives, like maybe just using a feather, because a lot of people do, you know, some groups do just use a feather. They don't actually need the bird. So yes, there is some offtake, but it's only in extreme circumstances, like in severe drought. So it wouldn't be something that's done willy-nilly just because it's a dry season. And there's only certain people within a community who would be responsible for that. And so we're just continuing engagement with the Sangoma Council and with traditional leadership to see where we can support. But then we find that the birds that are turning up in the Muti markets, it's really minimal. It's very likely that those birds were caught opportunistically. So maybe hunting dogs might take down a juvenile. And most of the traders maybe get one carcass every 5 years, and you know, they'll sell little bits off for years. So it's nothing like vulture trade or pangolin trade, and long may that last.
Absolutely, yes. Ali is asking again, except for breaking windows, are there any other conflicts in terms of rural communities, for example, eating domestic chicks?
Yes, they will eat domestic chicks, but generally people, you know, with that cultural reverence, there is also an associated fear. So a lot of the window breaking actually isn't in those rural areas, other than the schools. The designs of the houses have quite high windowsills, and so you know, there is a little bit of window breaking, but it's mostly at schools. And people generally chase them away because, you know, to have them land on your house is considered bad luck. And so usually they sort of chased on before they can cause too much damage.
Great. And then our friends from BirdLife are asking, can there be more than one female in a group?
So there may occasionally be a second female. There are cases of that, but by and large, there's just one adult female, the alpha female. And what we found with the monitoring of our birds, it's the alpha female who's intolerant to any other females. And you know, we've actually nearly lost birds by trying to reintroduce second females into the groups, and you know, the aggression has been almost lethal from the group members. So we've learned not to even try that anymore. So we just stick to one female per group. It may be that a dispersing female may join a group for a while. And our colleagues in the APNR have some video footage of two females feeding at a nest. So, you know, I think like anything in nature, there's no strict rules, but by and large, it's one female per group.
Sure, so definitely the queen bee of every group.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Our friends, Mr. Van Wyk and also Marty Kutza, are talking towards predation of these birds. So Mr. Van Wyk's asking, being so highly territorial, up to what size of predator or potential threat could they defend against? And what are the types of predators that these birds face in the wild?
So they're mostly vulnerable to ambush predation. So things like caracals, leopards. There's, you know, the guys at the Fitz have had some incredible footage of predation in the nest by leopards. And then some of the big eagles like martial eagle or crowned eagle. But generally that's also only when those youngsters are small. They're really quite dwarf for the first 4 years of their life. And that's when they're most likely to be predated. Once they sort of learned their bush skills and they're a bit streetwise, then they're much safer from predation. And, you know, and also being in a group helps. It's you know, a bunch of sets of eyes looking out for things. So predation's a biggest risk, I guess, in their first year or two.
Yeah, and that's definitely a trend we see with a lot of our large terrestrial birds. Those first few years, the young, dumb, and adventurous really do fall foul of some of these threats.
Yeah.
As are some of our human teenagers, I think.
Exactly.
Now, Mara's asking if you could please repeat the dimensions of the artificial nests, and do you know if these artificial nests could work well for the captive breeding programs?
So generally the nests are about 50 centimeters in diameter, and the entrance to the nest is about 20 centimeters high, just so that the female can hunker down and look out. You know, she can feel like she's hidden, or she can pop out and look out. We found that they're not actually great for captive breeding because they spend, they spend all day with it, so that there's much more chance of actually damaging the nest. But I guess they also totally destroy their wooden nests. But I think probably in a captive situation, I'd probably even go with something like cement or concrete, and then just provide lots of leaf lining for that if you want a permanent feature. We know from our birds they will hammer through wooden boxes in no time at all, and even some of these, not all of them, but some of them have managed to get through the new nests. Whereas the wild birds are, they're busy breeding, and they're not sort of needing entertainment while they're in captivity, so they're less likely to smash it to pieces.
Great. And then while we're talking nest boxes, we've got a quick question asking if there are any sort of environmental implications from the built nest that you guys have been able to pick up in terms of negative environmental implications. So leaching of the nests into soils and that sort of thing.
No, so the resin that we use is completely safe. It's something that you can use without needing gloves or to be in a ventilation fume cupboard or anything like that. And then instead of using a shade cloth, we use hessian and canvas as the matrix that holds the resin, so that there's no risk from that. And it's very unlikely that they get through to the center of that nest. The pigment that we use is safe, and then we've also tested the nests for the microclimate with eye buttons to make sure that we're not getting any crazy temperatures or humidities. And what we find is the nests track the best wild nests during the day, but they're not as insulatory at night. But actually that's not a problem, because when the chick needs that insulation at night to keep warm rather than to keep cool, that's when the hen is sitting on the eggs or the chick.
Great. I see we are getting close to 8:30, Lucy. We've got about 10 more questions to go. I'm going to ask our audience if they'll hold off on sending through any more, just so that we can get through the ones that are on the screen, so that we're not all here till midnight. But I'm really enjoying all the engagement, and thank you, Lucy, for dealing with all of these. There's another one asking, how can zoos abroad help with Southern Ground-Hornbill breeding programs, or using the Southern Ground-Hornbill as an animal ambassador, and can that help what we're doing as BirdLife and Mabula to do more for the conservation of this species?
Absolutely. We do have a number of international zoo partners, so please drop me an email. They're great ambassador birds, especially if you've got a show bird. And we try our best. I saw Anne was online. She's the stud bookkeeper for the American Zoo Association for the Southern Ground-Hornbills. So if you're part of a zoo association, get in touch with your stud bookkeeper, and then we're able to supply. And what we try with the captive populations is we try and share information as much as possible, because we're learning a lot in the field that helps captive facilities do a better job with looking after their birds, and vice versa. They're learning things and seeing behaviors that are helping our understanding in the field. So we do try and keep that cross flow of information going.
Great. And then I feel like we need to give a part 2 talk, because there's a few questions coming through of stuff that I cut out of my original Bird of the Year talk. So Leslie's asking whether we've done any radio tracking of birds to understand their movements. So I know, Lucy, there's been some incredible work done, particularly through the FITS and our colleagues at the Endangered Wildlife Trust, looking at radio tracking of Southern Ground-Hornbills. And there's some great data coming out of the APNR, which is where you calculated those home range estimates from.
Yeah, so there's been satellite tracking, and it's confirmed what we thought we knew about their movements, that they're central place foragers, that they use the rest of their territory during the dry season, that they are indeed very territorial, and those boundaries are quite fixed. And then we use radio telemetry on the reintroduced birds, just to reduce the risk of them having to carry a backpack harness. And at the moment we're looking, and we're in discussion with a company in New Zealand to actually use drone VHF tracking of the release groups, because it'll just reduce costs and also enable us to check on birds much more easily with less interaction from us.
Great. Yeah, definitely. Satellite tracking has revolutionized how we understand the way birds move. So Marshall's asking what the best method of people getting involved in supporting the Ground Hornbill Project is. They've got a few dozen shareholders on a small reserve in KZN. It is less than 100 square kilometers, but obviously it is in the sort of Zululand or KwaZulu-Natal area, and it would be great if they can provide support. I suppose if you want to elaborate on those WhatsApp groups again, Lucy.
All right, so definitely the first thing is to know what's happening in your area. So if you're interested in starting up one of those WhatsApp groups, please just drop me a line. And then, well, just drop me an email and then we can see where you are in the system, and then that'll help us understand how best to support you to support the birds, if that makes sense.
Awesome. And obviously you also post your social media Thunderbird Thursdays as well, if anybody wants to raise awareness through that platform too. Then Lindsay's asking if you could let us know about some of the hotspots in the Eastern Cape where the birds are seen with fair regularity. So sort of around the Hugga area, that's where there's a core population there. Up in some of the Merensky plantations, up beyond Butterworth, there's some core groups there. You know, we think there's scattering of groups actually all the way through. We just think that the reporting is really low in those areas. So if you want to jump in a car and go and find as many as possible, we'd be very, very grateful. But we don't have a very good understanding of the Eastern Cape at the moment, and that's one of the reasons we're really pushing and launching this monitoring plan this year, so we can really tighten up those gaps in our understanding. Brilliant. And then Sarah Green's asking, was there a robot bird in one of those pictures? I'm assuming she's talking about the dummy that you put on the screen and looking at some of your reintroduction successes. And what do you use it for?
Okay, so yeah, that's a fiberglass bird. So ground hornbills are very smart, as Sam showed in her cognitive behavior research. And so it's quite hard to capture them. And so we use fiberglass decoys, so that's one of them. And it's a way of, in that image, we were actually looking to see if those birds were carrying tags so that they could be recaptured. So that's what that image was from. But then we use it for trapping them. We put the decoy in a big trap. And they come in to see who this invader in their territory is, and that's usually is a way that we can trap them.
Great. Then Robin's saying that she's seen birds in Mozambique. Do you have many sightings reported from that region?
Hi, Robin. We do have some. So certainly Gorongosa we know is full up, and they've got crazy high densities, highest I've ever seen. You can lie in your tent there and hear 5 different groups all around you. I mean, it's just crazy compared to somewhere like Kruger. But no, we don't have strong sighting records. So again, you know, anyone, please send us any records, either, you know, if you see them live with the BirdLife app, or just WhatsApp us or email us, or there's a sighting platform on the website. And we're also interested in historic sightings. So if you've seen birds somewhere in the Eastern Cape in particular, or KZN, somewhere outside of Kruger, that you haven't reported anywhere, we'd still really much like to know that, if you can try and dig up where the locality was.
Brilliant. Maura is asking what the genetic risks are when it comes to harvesting birds from outside the current gene pool range in terms of your 4 target areas.
Okay, so it's more of an unknown and precautionary principle. The ground hornbills in Tanzania there's isolation by distance. So basically they're on the other end of the range, so they the most different from ours that can possibly be. And so, you know, there are risks like pathogen resistance, not being able to deal with some of our local tick loads and things like that. And so because we can harvest locally, we're not doing that. If we were down to just 1,000 hornbills in the whole world, and that is all we had, then certainly we'd carry on with that. But from a precautionary principle, we're sticking to what we know works and what we know is best for our local area.
Great, and luckily we're not at the point where we have to throw the precautionary principles out of the window yet. There was a request just to put the emails back up on the screen. I've done that, if anybody is looking to get in touch with Lucy. Rainier is asking, do bees not invade the nest boxes? I know our colleagues at the Cape Parrot project are struggling with bees getting into their nest boxes. Have you had a similar experience, Lucy?
So no, if anything, it's the other way around. The Northern Ground Hornbill is a very well recorded hive pest. So they would love to break a hive, they would love to eat the larvae in it. So part of the preliminary test that we've been doing with Elephants Alive with the hive here was just checking by putting it up in an estuary if the hornbills were going to be disturbed by having these things put in their estuary, which they weren't in the slightest, but also to make sure that they weren't going to destroy the hive. So yeah, hornbills are a different kettle of fish altogether.
Definitely. Now, Nick de Block is asking, he was in Kruger some years ago and recalls seeing ground hornbill sightings record books at some of the camper receptions. Do you know if those are still in place and are they still being monitored?
So they're not. That was the EWT project that closed in 2015. And so we should be able to get that up and running, hopefully early in the new year. The Scientific Services Committee is sitting with the proposal now. And in fact, I hope Sharon's not listening because I owe her some information on that. But I was busy preparing for the talk. So hopefully from next year, we'll be able to get all of the sighting record stuff for Kruger back up and running again.
Fantastic. It definitely does seem to be the heartland, so it'll be super if we can keep those sightings coming in. 3 more questions to go, Lucy. We're almost there.
Okay.
Our current raptor and large terrestrial bird project manager, Carl Walker, has asked what the best entertainment in terms of props or toys for your captive bred ground hornbills are.
Things they can destroy. So pumpkins, watermelons, food frozen in ice. So basically things, coconuts, sausage tree fruits, so things that take time for them to fiddle and be able to bash it, basically. We give them cardboard boxes to destroy, just, yeah, things to keep them busy. And with time, we're hoping to be able to look towards actually building enrichment programs that also do have a lot more learning involved. So that's definitely something still on the cards.
Great. And then Bree's asking whether you can tell us a little bit more about the cognitive behavioral investigation. This was where I think I jumped in on your presentation in our moment of connection loss. Yes, I did my best, but if you could just elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so that was, we invited a postdoctoral fellow from, well, she's at Oxford now, Dr. Samara Donnell. She does cognitive behavior research on birds. And essentially, any cognitive behavior research, you put the animal through a set of common tests. So whether it's a dolphin or a chimpanzee or a ground hornbill, they undergo the same sort of tests. And so I think that picture that I showed was maybe one of the smell ones or a visual thing. I'm not sure. But basically, she put the birds through these set of tests where they had choices to make. And the really nice thing with these experiments was it was their choice to take part, but being super smart and loving company and loving, you know, enrichment, I guess, she didn't have many problems with getting them to participate. So, you know, it was a voluntary participation by the birds. I mean, she's got some amazing papers coming out this year. I think she's managed to do 4 on just different aspects, but essentially the core thing is that they've come out as one of the most intelligent birds. And what I'm really hoping is, like people have an empathy for elephants because they have these long memories and they're intelligent, and the same for dolphins, I'm hoping once that research is published that we'll be able to use that as something to really create empathy for these birds, because you know, they're killing this and smashing up bunnies and things. Not everyone relates to that, but hopefully we can, you know, sort of get people to understand how smart they are, how long-lived, this socially complex, and hopefully garner support for them that way.
Absolutely. And finally, our last question from our friends at BirdLife. They're saying, sorry to harp on about the females, but they take it that you wouldn't introduce a female into the wild on her own, or would you?
We could, and that would be normal. But I think it's probably, it wouldn't be growing the population in any way. So we'd rather keep them for making sure that they become breeding pairs. And yeah, you know, so no, I mean, there's nothing wrong. And we might start doing calls of maybe 3 females if we need to move them out. And with time, that could then grow so that they're dispersals within an area where there are other birds. But just to put a female on her own out where there isn't a chance of her becoming a breeder, I think we could use her better and make her more useful to the South African population in general.
For sure. And with that, I think we bring to a close a marathon question session. It just shows you how much everybody loves these incredible birds. I see you, Yopi from San Diego Zoo has tuned in and really enjoyed that. So thanks, Yopi, for joining us. And thank you to the over 120 of you who stuck around for all these questions. I think there was some really interesting extra tidbits of information there. So thank you, Lucy, for sharing your absolute wealth of knowledge on these incredible birds with all of us. I certainly learned a lot as well tonight. So with that, a big thank you to all of you for joining us. Please remember, same time, same place next week, 7 o'clock. Duncan McKenzie is going to be making us all long for the Kruger Bushveld with his virtual tour. I hope that you'll all keep your eyes on the skies and keep your eyes outside. We've got lots of birds all around us, and I look forward to sharing another webinar with you next week. Thank you, Lucy. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe out there, and good night.